When I was 13, two saviors came into my life, Jesus and porn, and they were both competing for my heart. And I fought that battle for many years. Sometimes I could win, but I could always lose.
One of the reasons pornography and sexual sin are so powerful is because I don't think there's anything else that mimics the kind of intimacy that God created us for and counterfeits that intimacy like sexual sin and immorality.
Even after a year of no porn, I relapsed again and again. I went back to even more porn than I ever had before, and I thought, it feels like no matter how far away I get from it, it still has power over me.
James 5:16 isn't just saying be transparent, dump your crap, be disconnected from it, somebody pray at that person and you're going to get healed. There's an intimacy in the prayer. There's a vulnerability in that.
It's not men who get hooked on porn primarily. It's boys. So we have to heal the boy to free the man.
We need to look at where do the desires and attractions, where do they lead to and what are they connected to in our childhood when we were boys?
Our deepest desires are connected to our deepest suffering.
Gossip is one of the most destructive things ever, and I believe that God feels like that is an absolute abomination.
The Latin root vulnus means wound. So to be vulnerable is to be woundable. And until we become woundable, we can't be healable.
We've missed how even married men, married women, single men, single women, we need one another. We need that small band of brothers and sisters.
Our sexuality can be a place of bondage or bonding. And the more we have the real bonding, the easier it is to leave the bondage behind.
Welcome to the Love and Truth Network podcast, your guide for hope and healing in a hurting world searching for truth. Here we explore God's extraordinary design for biblical sexuality, identity, and authentic community. You'll be impacted by incredible stories of transformation, practical wisdom from pastors and counselors, and the power of God's grace that changes lives.
Well, hey there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. We're so glad that you're here with us. And I'm excited to have someone who I actually interviewed in the past for a particular project that we were working on with regard to pornography. But man, that's been quite a few years ago now. And Drew and I have known each other. We met at a conference that was happening in Texas. And it was a good meeting. And ever since then, we've kind of been connected. But he and I haven't really chatted too much in the last couple of years. And it's been kind of fun to catch up with him before we jumped into this particular podcast. But I'm excited for you to hear from him. He has a powerful story of God's work in his life. And he's doing really incredible things in the kingdom in helping men get set free from the addiction and proclivities toward sexual sin, pornography, and all of those kinds of things. So, Drew, thanks so much for being with us for this episode.
Thanks, Garry. Here we go.
Well, I would love for you to just kind of share your story. I've heard it, of course, but I'd love for our listeners and viewers to get to know you a little bit and what your background is and what you're doing now.
As a boy, I developed a love-hate relationship with porn. When I was 13, two saviors came into my life, Jesus and porn, and they were both competing for my heart. And I fought that battle for many years. Sometimes I could win, but I could always lose. And even after a year of no porn, I relapsed again and again. I went back to even more porn than I ever had before. And I thought, it feels like no matter how far away I get from it, it still has power over me. That's when I started looking deeper into not just stopping the behavior or not just getting closer to God, but being able to just not need it anymore. And that has what allowed me to be free for the past 10 years.
Yeah, that's incredible. And you've been married for how long? How many years?
9 years. So my most important season of healing and growth took place when I was engaged to be married, and I wanted to become husband material. And that's where the name husband material came from.
Which is the name of your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew that if I was going to take those wedding vows, I needed to know that I could actually keep them.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I didn't want my wife to ever have to worry about secret sexual behavior, but my sexual fantasies just felt so strong. And I knew that like eventually I was going to go back unless something changed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, and you have displayed on either side of you behind you a book that has been around. I think you had recently published a book when I first met you quite a few years ago, Redeemed Sexuality. By the way, not to be confused with our friend Christy Cole's book, Redeeming Sexuality. And I know that that was a great book and very helpful for me to read as well. But you have a pretty new one out, which is Outgrow Porn, right? And so talk a little bit about those two books, those two resources.
Redeemed Sexuality was a spiritual formation resource. And that's one important piece of this puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Outgrow Porn goes a lot deeper into the childhood origins that were at the core of my sexual fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a fetish for braces and orthodontics. And I was like, why? What is going on there? Is that just random? Did God create me this way? Turns out it has a lot to do with my life in middle school and wanting to rewrite what happened to me during those years.
Mm.
So being drawn to girls and women with braces represents the magical solution that I never had when I was going through puberty.
Mm-hmm.
And so Outgrow Porn talks about that. It's not men who get hooked on porn primarily. It's boys. So we have to heal the boy to free the man.
That's a great perspective. Yeah. And for those listening or viewing that are just like, what, braces? And what I've come to realize from the years I've been doing this as well, and have met with countless people, as you have now for sure, that are dealing with a variety of porn addiction, sexual brokenness, is that, I used to think that, and I come out of the LGBT world and same-sex attraction and that kind of stuff. And I thought, at one time I thought, well, I'm just uniquely broken. There's, no guys aren't like me typically, unless someone's dealing with the same things I'm dealing with exactly. They're so much further ahead than I am. And part of what needs to happen is we need to realize, oh gosh, the good news, bad news is we're all broken, and we all have proclivities to a wide range of things that God has said are off limits, and they're not going to, but they're not just off limits, but they're off limits because they're going to harm you, and they don't lead to life, they don't lead to human thriving. And but when I came to realize that, wow, guys dealing with heterosexuality, they've never been same-sex attracted, they've never struggled with gender identity issues or those kind of things as we think of them sexually or in terms of transgenderism or whatever. I used to kind of have them in this bucket of healthier than people like me. And what I've realized is that and so this also goes to the idea that many times a guy, well, when they work up the nerve to actually confess, maybe in a men's group or in a group that's designed more for sexual struggles or whatever, they talk about, well, I looked at porn or I did this. What I've realized is it's not sufficient to hear someone say, I looked at porn. The question is, well, let's talk a little bit about what kind of porn, because now, we can say we looked at porn and that's a shameful thing, and it's good to break the power of that shame. But the truth is, we're still carrying deep levels of shame about the kind of stuff we're looking at. And also the kind of things we're looking at go right back to what you were talking about in terms, and Jay Stringer, of course, writes about this in Unwanted, and you've been connected with Jay. I think you've had some training with Jay about, we need to look at, where do the desires and attractions, where do they lead to, and what are they connected to in our childhood when we were boys? Where does that lead to? And I think that's exactly, or correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe flesh that out a little bit more, what you're talking about with regard to that particular fetish. I think most people are dealing with some level of some kind of particular fetish, and we don't even realize it.
We don't talk about it.
Right.
Everyone has some version of unwanted sexual attraction.
Mm-hmm.
And porn is always particular. There's no general porn. There's no such thing as straight porn.
Yeah.
The specifics have sexual power over us. Everyone has particular triggers that turn them on and turn them off. But because of shame and because of stigma, we just don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So in this podcast, I hope it's giving you all more permission to talk about it as a starting point. And then, as Jay Stringer says, let those fantasies become a roadmap to your healing. And in Outgrow Porn, I spell out some very specific ways that can happen.
Give some examples of that, or just talk a little bit more about how you've spelled that out.
Yeah. Every sexual fantasy is an attempt to rewrite reality. We fantasize whenever we say, what if? What if I had that job? What if I had that person as my romantic partner? And so fantasizing is not bad. It's part of our God-given imaginations. And our fantasies are transforming pain into pleasure somehow. Our deepest desires are connected to our deepest suffering. What do I mean by pain and suffering? Well, there are three core experiences that I see as the three great sexualizers: fear, shame, and loss. And our fantasies, in many different ways, often represent safety from what we fear, glory that removes our shame, and connection that restores what has been lost. That's what our fantasies often symbolize. That's what porn is promising to our hearts. And if you can get the real version of safety, glory, and connection, wow, porn loses its power.
Yes. Yeah. We talk a lot about how at the core of sexual sin and addiction, compulsion, we believe that underneath of all of that is a lack of genuine and authentic relationship, that where men don't know how to receive from one another in the body of Christ. I mean, sometimes I think guys outside of the body of Christ actually have some level of deeper connection, oftentimes, sadly, and not necessarily a connection that leads to good ends necessarily, or that meet all of their needs. But I mean, we've been redeemed by Christ to also experience what it looks like to have open and vulnerable relationships with one another. And we also talk a lot about how as men who are opposite sex attracted, or women, we oftentimes think, well, we're kind of good to go. Like, we've got this image bearing thing down, we're men made in the image of God. And I'm like, that has almost good for you, but that has almost nothing to do with bearing out God's image well, just because you happen to be opposite sex attracted. The question is, how are you going to live that out? And so often what I see is that men, even in the church, have made an idol out of their wife, or a wife has made an idol out of her husband, and they have no really deep relationships outside of their home with brothers supporting brothers, and a band of brothers or a band of sisters. And I think that's essential, that we were made to need that blessing and affirmation from one another. I think there's a way we experience Christ, we experience God through those connections, where when they're not there, we're missing some of those deep aspects of God.
Amen. Men need men. Women need women.
Yeah.
Like people need people. We're relational.
Yes. One of the things I've never forgotten, and I've often gone back to the time when you and I were doing this interview, 5 years ago or whatever it was. And you have given the best example and laid out the difference between transparency and vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to share that now for our podcast, because it's the difference of heart connection versus just dumping crap, or can you unpack that, the difference between those two words?
Yeah. So we talk about how confession is important and we need to be real and honest with each other. Yet many of us have done that many times and it hasn't really made much of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because we've confused transparency with vulnerability.
Yes.
So imagine you're going to the zoo and you're looking into the exhibit of a tiger or a lion. And you're looking through this thick piece of glass. You can see the lion can see you. That's transparency, but not vulnerability.
Mm,
Vulnerability is when you take away the glass
there you go.
and now you're in the arena. Now you could either have an incredible, wonderful, empowering experience where you're hugging
Yes.
a lion or something, or you're going to get wounded and you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get hurt. So you know instinctively what that feels like when you're telling somebody your story and there's a barrier in the way versus when you're giving somebody the ability to either hurt you or heal you with how they respond.
Yes.
The Latin root vulnus means wound. So to be vulnerable is to be woundable. And until we become woundable, we can't be healable.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. And so that idea, Drew, of, I mean, most of us aren't even transparent, in the church, and it's a good stepping stone to get to a place of being transparent. But people need to also understand that's not totally sufficient. That's not where the deepest healing is going to come from. That your heart needs to be connected. You can't just kind of, let the chips fall where they will and just dump your crap and walk away. Protecting your heart because you're afraid of being wounded, because then in addition to that, like, you don't have the experience of being loved and accepted, and even in the midst, not that your sin is accepted, but you are accepted regardless of that, and in that acceptance, we're going to walk forward together toward Jesus. We're going to walk. Well, actually, Jesus is already with us, but we're walking with him, as opposed to again, just dumping our information and thinking that we've somehow done James 5:16, confess your sins to one another and pray for each other that you might be healed. There's also a need for vulnerability, even in our prayers and in our prayer time. We so often, I think, in our prayers for one another, and this issue, I used to think mistakenly that this was all just a spiritual issue. This is just spiritual failing. This is, but now I understand, of course, and so many understand this now, that this is a neurological issue. It's a total person issue, spirit, soul, and body. But in order for us to really fulfill James 5:16, James 5:16 isn't just saying be transparent, dump your crap, be disconnected from it. Somebody pray at that person and you're going to get healed. There's an intimacy in the prayer. There's a vulnerability in that. There's a taking in deeply of the love and the care of our brothers around us or our sisters around us in entering into that. And it's through that there's actual healing.
Yeah.
Not just the function.
Said. Right. And we also need to find safe spaces where we can do that.
Yes.
Because
that's right.
Oftentimes churches are stuck in purity culture and they're not going to respond with love and acceptance and kindness.
Yeah. Well, and so you mentioned purity culture, and one of the things, I think Christy Cole and I have talked about this too, is that purity culture, for me, there were a lot of true things in purity culture, but it also was so heavy-handed on the do's and don'ts, but didn't explain, from my recollection of it at all, there was very little explained about the whys. Maybe and very little about the hows, but the whys especially were completely absent, and really casting a vision for the goodness and the wholesomeness of this versus, no, you go through these functions, you put this ring on, you say these words, and somehow that's going to whatever, that's going to sustain you. And yet we're looking now at some of the fallout of purity culture, and even like Joshua Harris has just deconstructed his faith altogether, the author of I Kiss Dating Goodbye, and others within that framework. So there has to be more to actually finding healing than just putting up boundaries. And I think boundaries can be very helpful, to for sure, but they're not the main thing. The net under how enjoyable would it be to go and see somebody, doing some trapeze act when all they do is stand on the net below you? I mean, it's great that the net is there as a safety, right? But if that's all they're doing is just fooling around in the net, there's something exciting about that. And I feel like that's what we're doing when we live the Christian life just by do's and don'ts. That's great to have that as a boundary to know, oh shoot, I've stepped outside. I'm in a place where there's danger here and I need to correct this. But it's about heart connection and relationship. That's the flow of what we're supposed to be living into, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you want to be free for? Not just what do you want to be free from?
There you go. Talk about that a little bit more. The idea of being free for, not just free from.
Well, purity culture emphasized cultures of control. It was all about setting up a kind of prison cell where you can't get to porn because you've got all these restrictions, or somebody's going to find out if you look at porn through surveillance, through accountability software. And again, that has value. For me, that value was very limited because I could find my arousing images without traditional porn. Mm-hmm. So none of those prison cells could ever keep me in. Instead of creating cultures of control, I have found so much more healing in cultures of connection. Places where I can tell my story, and especially the specific things that I feel disgusted by, disqualified by, and then to be received with nothing but acceptance and compassion, and to actually have my deeper desires fulfilled. That puts me in a state where I just don't want porn. I just don't need porn because I have something better.
That's right.
It was a solution, a bad solution, yet a solution nevertheless. And when we take the outgrow porn approach, we find much more satisfying solutions.
Yep. Yeah, I would just encourage people that if you're listening to this and you're wrestling with pornography or sexual sin, or others that are, and the idea, sometimes people come to a conference or when I'm preaching at a church or whatever, and they want to buy my story, Am I Gay, and give it to somebody who's often in the LGBT space. I'm like, that's probably not the best approach. Why don't you read it? Why don't you get yourself equipped? And I'd say the same thing about your book. If you have somebody that you want to minister to, first get yourself equipped by reading good content like Drew's books, and getting connected with what he's doing in ministry and his the website and all those things. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, really prepare your own heart so that you and get trained and equipped so you have a much better idea of when a right time might be, to just engage in conversation out of the knowledge that you've learned with the person you love and care about that's caught up in sexual addiction or whatever the case is. But then you'd have a better idea also to know, hey, I've read this book and I think this could be really a good resource for you. That's so much better than just buying something and passing it along without you yourself. Maybe you're not wrestling with these issues at all, but again, you want to be more equipped or more effective in helping others. And so definitely getting a book like that, I think, could be important. So consider that for sure, and consider connecting with what Drew is doing in ministry. So Drew, you also have a podcast, and you're doing some other, you're doing retreats for men, and talk about some of the range of ministry that you're engaged in.
Most of it's free. The podcast, the private community, our online conferences and workshops. And then we also have paid programs online and in person where we go a lot deeper. So Husband Material Academy is our online program, which is the all-in-one program for Christian men outgrowing porn. 10 coaching calls per week, 32 videos. It's really cheap. It's only $59 a month, and we have discounts. We recently became a 501c3 nonprofit, so we're able to make this accessible to a lot more people.
Mm-hmm.
And then a few times per year, we do retreats where we get together in person, and that is so powerful because a lot of what we're struggling with sexually, emotionally, is in our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
As Bessel van der Kolk is famous for saying, the body keeps the score. The body is where we carry trauma, where our sexual fantasies feel so powerful. And so to have embodied healing experiences can lead to so much more lasting freedom.
And it really, what you're talking about there just kind of strikes at the core of how when people get involved in, and again, usually boys or girls get involved in some form of sexual sin, often pornography, it's happening at such early ages, and often it's filling in a gap. We talk a lot about how pornography, sexual sin is a form. There's lots of other ways, but I think one of the reasons pornography and sexual sin are so powerful is because I don't think there's anything else, substance abuse or any of that, I don't think there's anything else that mimics the kind of intimacy that God created us for and counterfeits that intimacy like sexual sin and immorality, because we were made for intimacy, we were made for love, we were made for these deep relationships. And when we aren't getting those things or experiencing that, which most of us aren't, even in the best of homes, we're not getting everything that we need. But in some cases, it's really, really lacking, or we're getting a lot of garbage and junk, abuse and things like that we certainly don't need. So we're walking around as kind of empty vessels, and we were created to be filled up relationally, to be, loved with our clothes on, and to experience acceptance and all of those things. But when we don't get that, and we experience that intense feeling of acceptance or escape or some form of love that might not even come across in our minds as logical, and yet we're meeting legitimate God-given needs in illegitimate ways. I know you've already kind of addressed that, but I'd love to just unpack that even a little bit more.
Well, that's why the image on the cover of Outgrow Porn is a pacifier.
Yes, it's so good.
Porn is a pacifier.
Mm-hmm.
And you really think about it, a pacifier is a fake nipple with no milk.
Yep.
It is mimicking what we are created for.
Mm.
And especially as infants, we need to be nourished. We need to be nurtured. But a pacifier is a counterfeit version of that.
Yes.
And it's very understandable to use a pacifier when you're a kid. But when you grow up,
right,
you got to outgrow it. And that happens naturally as you sexually and emotionally develop. But for many of us, our development was stunted because we didn't get that nurture and nourishment. So we're turning to an artificial version of it. And it symbolizes something so good. It symbolizes divine desires like acceptance, affirmation, adventure, affection. And
Yep.
God created us to experience those things. And porn is just a shadow of it. And that's why it has power over us.
Right. I think so many people, I've heard this over and over again, I'm sure you have too, that, people will come up to me after I've spoken on a Sunday morning or done a weekend ministry event or whatever, or a conference, and they have, and I get it, like there's legit, what they're saying is legit in one sense, that they don't feel, they've just dismissed everything that I've spoken for themselves personally, because they've been so wounded and have been so damaged in trust and those kinds of things that they've taken some experiences, sometimes only a couple or a few experiences in their family or even in the church, or in some cases, many experiences, and they've overlaid that across the entire body of Christ and just believe that no one is really safe, that there's of course, all of us are sinners, but and we will let one another down. Ultimately, we need to have our hope and faith rooted in Christ, but we can be whole enough gifts to one another. Even in our imperfection, in our failures, we can still give an incredible life and joy and connection, and even that relational soothing to one another. And so, for those listening or watching that feel like, oh, what you're talking about, Garry, Drew, like that's all great. Like I sort of connect with that intellectually in some way, but I can't. I can't possibly step into what you're talking about relationally because, and kind of fill in the blank. What would you share with somebody who's kind of in that place of almost dismissing, or at least for themselves, like that's going to work for everybody else, but not for me?
My heart goes out to that person.
Mm-hmm.
It's so heavy. It's so hard. For many of us, porn is the most secure attachment we've ever had. More reliable, trustworthy, and present than real people. And so giving it up is not like giving up chocolate or trying to go to the gym more often, as Andrew Bauman has written. It's more like breaking up with someone who's been there for decades. And it's actually analogous to leaving a sexually abusive partner.
Yes.
Because porn is not just a pacifier, it's also a predator. And so for many of us, this path to lasting freedom looks a lot like healing from sexual abuse.
Yeah, that's really true.
So for anyone who feels like, oh, everyone else is having an easier time with this, and I'm too broken, I'm beyond hope, what works for other people doesn't work for me. Maybe what you're dealing with is actually a lot deeper. Like a sexual abuser who has played an integral role in your entire life. I mean, for so many of us, it started when we were little kids, 8 years old, 12 years old. And it makes sense that it's going to take time to unlearn those patterns we picked up from such a young age and to relearn real relationships.
That's right.
In some ways, a real person can never compete with porn. And in other ways, porn can never compete with a real person. Because porn can't see you. Porn can't touch you. Can't love you. Porn can't laugh at your jokes. Porn can't hug you or hold you or pray for you. And I know that we're getting into an age when increasingly internet pornography is becoming generated by AI, and there are more in-person encounters available easily. Yet, as you said, we often experience God through other people, and porn pales in comparison to that real intimacy we were made for.
Yeah. Well, and even that's so true, but to even take that out further, I mean, there's some people that I've spoken to and have walked with who porn is not really a thing. Like maybe it started with porn when they were young, but now it's hookup culture. It's prostitution. It's, whatever the thing is, now they're only basically sexually aroused and attracted to real people. But even with that, what you're saying still applies, because and Paul talks in 1 Corinthians about the idea of, do you not understand? Do you not know that even when you're having sex with a prostitute, you become one flesh with her? And so I think the reason Paul even highlights the idea of prostitution there is because he's trying to make a point that even in a completely emotionally disconnected relationship, like there's nothing going on emotionally, there's no commitment, neither person is fooled by that. This is a transactional thing. But even then, there's a a bond that's happening. There's a one flesh union that's happening, but it actually isn't giving life. It isn't extending love. It's wrapped up in lust. It's wrapped up in need. It's wrapped up maybe in craving or addiction, or again, trying to resolve broken things of the past. So the only pathway forward, and what Jesus offers us, is this replacement. That's also something that purity culture really missed out on, was abstain, 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 abstain. But the Christian message really is replace. Stop eating at the table of the enemy and come to eat at my table. Come and have a banquet feast with me. I don't want you to starve. I don't want you to be anorexic or bulimic. I want you to really take in all of the goodness so that you're filled up. And when you're filled up, it's so much easier to say no to sexual sin.
Right. And the closest thing to a replacement that purity culture offered was getting married and having sex with your spouse. But that turned into treating your spouse as a replacement for porn.
Yep.
As your new object, your new sexual vending machine, which was so damaging and harmful to everyone involved. So marriage is not the solution. Sex within marriage is not necessarily going to be satisfying the way that purity culture promised. We need a much deeper answer that involves God and community and healing within ourselves, and being able to live out our true purpose instead of settling for a pacifier.
Mm-hmm. Well, even to highlight that a little bit more, I can't tell you the number of guys that when I was on pastoral staff before starting the ministry that we now lead, and obviously in this ministry too, I can't tell you the number of men that I talk to who are married and still wrestle with pornography. And sometimes even in relationships where their wives are not in any way withholding, they enjoy sex with their husbands, they're very available to them, but we've misunderstood that the problem isn't, oh, I just need more sex in my marriage, or I need to, just what you said, I need to replace my porn addiction with, getting married and having all the sex I want or something. It's such a demeaning view of marriage. It's such a low view of marriage. Of course,
Exactly.
Sex is a beautiful thing in the context of marriage, the way God designed it, but it's meant for so much more than that. And to highlight something else we were talking about, so many of these guys, I can tell you I have not met, they're probably out there, but I have not met a man, a husband, Christian guy who's wrestling with pornography, is married, even ones who have wives that are very open and willing and desiring to be with them. I have not met one who's in a situation where they're bound up in pornography, where they have good, solid brotherhood relationships. Not one. They might go to a men's group, but they aren't talking about anything that they're dealing with. The men in their groups typically aren't talking about these deeper issues as well. It winds up being more of a Bible study or a social kind of something or other once a week, but they're not getting to the heart of the matter. And to me, that just underscores there's something about that brotherhood of believers, that sisterhood for women, that is such an essential part that we've missed, even in what we're talking about typically in our churches. We've missed how even married men, married women, single men, single women, we need one another. We need that small band of brothers and sisters who are actually doing life together, not just ones that, well, I can call them, or I can. No, it's not the can. It's, are you doing it? Are you actually together? Are you actually gleaning the benefit of the life of Christ in that brother in vulnerable ways? And are you giving back? Is there this ebb and flow going on that winds up filling us up in a way that we've turned illegitimately to porn or sexual sin or whatever? Or again, we're expecting our wife to meet all of these needs when she's not been designed to, or we're expecting our husband to meet all of these needs, and they can't possibly do that. We've got to come back to a place of where we have an overflow from these brotherhood, sisterhood relationships that we can pour back into our spouse and vice versa. I just think that's one of the missing links, I think, foundations a relationship that I'm not seeing much in all of my travels and speaking in churches and those kind of things. We have men's groups, women's groups, small groups, but that deep, connected band of brothers, band of sisters, I speak to that all the time, and churches wake up and say, wait a minute, we do need this. And when churches embrace that, I see the DNA and the function of that church over several years of time start to really shift and change in incredibly positive directions. But most churches don't have that level of connection in bands of brothers or bands of sisters.
Yeah. Men and women in general are lonelier than ever, especially since COVID.
Yes.
Increasingly isolated. Average number of friendships continues to go down. And one of the best ways to develop deep, vulnerable friendships is in this context of our sexual brokenness.
Yep.
When you get to know someone's darkest secrets, you can talk about anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible. It is bonding. Our sexuality can be a place of bondage or bonding. And the more we have the real bonding,
That's right.
the easier it is to leave the bondage behind.
And also, one of the benefits of that too is we're ruined for less. Like I never want to go back to where I was before, where I was just trying to kind of live out the Christian life sort of by myself. I mean, yes, I had people around me, and yes, I was going to church, but there was very little actual relational connection. We often say, the Christian F word is I'm fine. Fine is I'm so sick of people always saying that, when in fact, I mean, in some cases, obviously that's probably very true in the moment, but we all tend to use that word when actually, man, there's so much brokenness that's being unaddressed, not just for that week or, that month, but for years, sometimes decades of time. So we have to learn to find those brothers, find those sisters. And by the way, we don't need to sit and wait around for the church to develop a program. That's the good news. We can actually lean into this and prayerfully consider just finding some brothers out of our men's group, out of whatever, some connection, maybe even outside of our own church, where the question is, for me, you know what, Dan, I've been around you in men's group, or I've seen you in church, and I've heard you pray, and it seems like you have a sincere desire to connect more deeply with God. I know there's stuff in my life that kind of gets in the way of some of that, and I've realized that I need to have some brothers in my life that help sharpen me and where we can be really open and vulnerable with one another. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in that kind of thing. I've seen guys, now some guys are going to say no, like they're too busy, they're this, they're that. But those I've seen over and over again, guys jump at that opportunity because it's something deeper. It's not just a men's group, typical kind of men's group. It's actually something that could offer life and benefit and love and brotherhood that again fills us up. So it's not rocket science to do it, but so many of us, I think, stop from even asking the question because we don't know how to do that. Well, it's as simple as a 10 or 20 second conversation or ask of another brother.
Yeah. The difficulty is in taking the redemptive risk.
Yes, that's
to
right.
do it.
That's
and
right.
I hope Outgrow Porn will be a resource for groups like that.
Absolutely.
It's got lots of free videos and worksheets and questions to guide groups like that.
So good. So good. Well, and so you also talk a little bit more about how your groups online, how they run. I think there's also, and I may be mistaken, but I think there's also like maybe a Facebook group or a social media, a group where there can be some ongoing support and connection as guys need that. Talk a little bit about those options.
The Husband Material Community is a free private online platform with about 7,000 members currently. And it's a place where you can tell your story, where you can ask questions, where you can celebrate progress, receive support. Then our academy, the paid program, has over 100 men in student-led small groups. Men who have been through the program before are trained to lead those small groups. We call them triads. There are also quads of 4 and squads of 5.
Mhm.
But essentially, it's guys doing exactly what you're talking about, being vulnerable and responding to each other with curiosity, compassion, and connection. And then we also do private small groups led by our certified professional coaches that are 12 weeks long and much more committed, much more guided. And then I'm leading my own groups as well. And we have healing weekends and retreats where you have a much more intense experience, yet also more intimate.
Yep.
So
Well,
there are
and-
levels.
Yes, yes. And I've heard really good things from a couple of guys that have gone through I think the 12-week online group, and then have also come in person to a retreat. And now the name husband material, for example, like I love that name, but I also, if I were kind of in the midst of just wondering, look, can I even get out of this world of same-sex attraction, or out of homosexuality, or out of the cycles of what I'm in here, and I came across something by the name of husband material, I'd automatically think, well, that must be just for straight guys. But the truth is, you have lots of guys that are involved, maybe even the larger percentage, that are dealing with same-sex attraction or something in the LGBT space. Can you just speak to that a little bit?
It's always been surprising for me that over 50% of our community is sexually attracted to other men. It means that we take safety very seriously, and we want the app and all of our ministry to be a place where you're healing, not susceptible to hooking up or harming yourself or others. But within that, we want you to experience real, satisfying, spiritual, emotional connection with other men.
Yeah.
And that's not an SSA thing. That's a human thing. Like, that's not just something special that only some guys need.
Right.
It's oxygen to our souls.
And
And
that's right.
I've found that my vulnerability about my sexual fetish has helped a lot of other guys feel safe no matter what their sexual attractions are.
Yep. That's right. And
It's empowering too, because even though I might seem like straight because I'm not sexually attracted to other men, I wouldn't identify that way because I have all kinds of attractions and sexual thoughts that go against what I truly want. And so I really don't think anyone is straight, so to speak. However, I don't think anyone is crooked either. Like, God made our sexuality. It's good, and it's been shaped by all kinds of different things. And as we grow and heal, we can become sexually mature adults.
That's right. Yes. And one of the things that I'm most often asked a lot about, you probably are too, is just the nature of confidentiality and the reality that gossip has just ruined the church in terms of trust. And now when I say ruin the church, I think the church can come back from that, but the local church needs to address the issues of gossip and sharing crap that is not your business to be talking about, that someone has confided in you about and is trusting you with, and now you're running off and talking about their garbage to your husband, your wife, or somebody else, and you are utterly destroying that sense of trustworthiness of that body, of that community, which Proverbs 6 verses 16 through 19 talks at the end of 19. It says, well, first of all, it says that there are 6 things that God hates, 7 that are an abomination to him. So it ain't just homosexuality that's an abomination to God. But the last thing on that list is those who spread strife amongst the brethren. And there's no better way to spread strife amongst brethren. There's lots of ways, but gossip is one of the most destructive things ever. And I believe that God feels like that is an absolute abomination when we engage in that kind of behavior of taking other people's stuff that they feel so shameful about, and they're really trying to work through, and they're trying to open up. And the enemy loves nothing more than to feed a gossip and for that gossip to go out and share stuff that's not theirs. Unpack that a little bit more from your perspective.
Confidentiality is absolutely essential. Whenever we do a workshop, a group, any place where we're asking men to open up, we want it to be as safe as possible, and that includes every single person making a commitment to keeping everyone's personal information shared confidential.
Yeah.
Now, there are situations where we need to report
That's right.
a situation when we need to prevent harm, and we always do that very carefully. Like when there's child abuse or criminal activity that's going on, like I need to get consultation and supervision about that,
Right.
to make sure that we are both protecting people inside our group and outside our group.
That's right. When suicide is, mentioned or threatened or whatever, I mean, although there's definitely reasons for breaking confidence for the sake of the person or somebody who can be harmed, for sure. But the vast majority of what's shared that or is gossiped about is typically not. Of course, that's not gossip either. It's when we take unnecessary things and start spreading it around. So yeah,
And
it's so
often
critical.
Outside of a conversation with the person.
Yes.
So even if we're going to report somebody, we'll be very open with that person and talk about it and consider every side rather than going behind someone's back.
Well, and you talked about this a moment ago, but I just want to also unpack this a little bit more and have you speak to it for your groups. But I know in the groups that we've done in person and groups that we may be doing in the future online, the idea, somebody who may have a sexual fall when they're in our group, and they come back and they confess that, and they're desiring again change, and they seem genuine in their repentance, and they're wanting to continue to press into change and transformation. That is something certainly that we're going to be encouraging them to stay in the program and continue to work out their sobriety and their growing out of whatever the thing is, that pornography or sexual sin or whatever. I say all that, but then one of the other things that is a really rigid guideline for us is don't be a predator in our groups. Do not think that you're going to come and try to lure someone away or try to draw somebody into some situation where there's sexting going on or there's something. If you're going to do that, nothing is going to get you kicked out of our group fast enough, and you're going to be out, because for you to do that really undermines the safety of the group in another way besides gossip. It undermines you're functioning as a predator. Doesn't mean that you're beyond redemption, but we're letting you know up front, if you engage with the sheep in your group or that have entrusted us, and we find out about that, that's it. I mean, you're not going to be back in again. So what are your thoughts about that, and that being a guideline and a boundary that's like right up front that people know about?
I would draw a distinction between predatory behavior and falling into the addictive cycle of sexually acting out with another person.
Okay.
It's not always predatory. In our community, if somebody hooks up or engages in sexting with another member, then we remove them, and we have a restoration process for somebody to be able to return within a year if they've demonstrated that they have rebuilt trust and a level of safety where we feel confident in allowing them to rejoin.
Okay.
Because
how would that? What are some of the markers for you guys in terms of being able to rebuild trust to come back in the group? Yeah. That's a great thing you're saying.
In the husband material community, we require 1 year of freedom from the behavior that got them removed.
Okay.
As well as a reference from a professional coach, counselor, or therapist who has been working with them and can vouch for them and say, I expect that this
That's
guy
great.
is now able to keep the boundaries you've set in your group.
Yep. Yes. And coming back to what I said earlier, I not necessarily that the individual is a predator, but I think the behavior can be predatory, even when it's like, oh, I'm just getting caught back in this cycle again. And, it's so important. Otherwise, everything can so easily unravel and kind of run amok if there's not firm boundaries around that. So
my encouragement would be, if you're in a group like that and you ever feel like something is a little off or doesn't feel right, if it starts to be icky or potentially inappropriate, please tell your leader, because your body is often aware of warning signs before our brains catch up.
Ladies, for those who are listening or just maybe feeling a little frustrated or feeling like, well, I'm kind of out of the conversation, I would encourage you with our good friend, Crystal Renaud Day. She runs She Recovery. It's an incredible ministry organization that walks with women in ways that aren't going to be identical to what Drew's talking about, but are similar. And she's had her own long journey of in a lot of not just sobriety, but has outgrown also her pornography addiction, that when she was first exposed to her brother's porn at the age of 10, and how that just grew into this massive addiction for so much of her life. And she's been walking in freedom for a long time. But there's a lot of women within our country, but she does online conferences, and there have been women from many, many different countries that have tuned in for these conferences. This is a women's issue every bit as much as it is a men's issue. And so I would just encourage you to reach out specifically and see what the resources are, or what resources are available to you through She Recovery. So thank you, Drew, for being with us today and for joining us for this episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast.
You're welcome. And anybody who wants to get a copy of Outgrow Porn can go to outgrowporn.com.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We hope to see you in another episode of the Love and Truth Network podcast. Bless you.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us for the Love and Truth Network podcast. We hope that the stories and insights shared have ignited in you a sense of God's powerful love for you and given you encouragement for your own journey toward relational and sexual wholeness. Remember, transformation is absolutely possible when rooted in grace, truth, and authentic biblical community. Subscribe today, share with a friend, share with your pastor, and we look forward to seeing you in our next Love and Truth Network podcast.